Basketball. For example, Syracuse can wrap up the Big East regular season title for the first time tonight, and Arkansas playing its very last Southwest Conference game. All that in spring training at 11:30 Eastern Time tonight.
No matter what escape route the Iraqi forces try taking out of Kuwait, they are running into Allied forces. Our military affairs correspondent Wolf Blitzer reports.
Pentagon officials are having a hard time containing their optimism over what they see as a rout in the making.
Iraqi army is in full retreat, although there is still some fighting going on.
Pentagon sources say the Army's 24th Mechanized Infantry Division has captured a lengthy convoy of more than 50 Republican Guard T-72 tanks near the Euphrates River. They say the Iraqis were trying to evacuate the tanks to Baghdad, and the Army's 101st Airborne Division is now halfway between Basra and Baghdad. Just to the south, battling the Republican Guard, are the Army's 1st Division based in Germany and the 1st Mechanized Division, known as the Big Red One. The Allies have moved along several fronts. From the west, U.S. and French forces advanced north into Iraq, all the way to the Euphrates River and towards the city of Basra. The goal, cut off Iraqi forces retreating north out of Kuwait. Further east, British and U.S. forces advanced deep into Iraq, finding and defeating Republican Guard units. Meanwhile, Saudi, Egyptian, Kuwaiti, and Syrian forces thrust deep into Kuwait with the U.S. Army and Marine Corps. Together, they fought and won major tank battles, while other coalition forces rolled up the coastal highway towards Kuwait City. The Allies moved faster than expected. One reason, Iraqis surrendered by the thousands. Another reason, Iraqi command and control capabilities have been curtailed or cut. With no aerial reconnaissance or forward spotters, Iraqi artillery corps don't know what they're hitting. Sources say the Iraqis fired short-range Frog missiles but hit their own troops.
The battlefield is confused right now on the part of the Iraqis. They're having difficulty sensing from which direction they might be attacked. Problems remain. The Republican Guard outside Kuwait in southern Iraq remains dug in and combat effective. It's 3 armor, 4 infantry, and 1 special forces division. So it is not, that element has not been defeated, so they could certainly mount some kind of an attack. And there is still Allied concern that Saddam Hussein could try a one-shot chemical weapons attack with his remaining warplanes. The withdrawal announcement from Baghdad has made no difference at the Pentagon. Officials say Iraqis must drop their weapons to leave the battlefield.
Now that he's losing, he wants to set the rules of the game, and it doesn't work that way.
U.S. military briefers say they are determined that Saddam Hussein will pose no threat to his region for a long time to come. And so there will be no let-up on the battlefield. Wolf Blitzer, CNN, the Pentagon.
U.S. Secretary of State James Baker will discuss Gulf War diplomacy with the foreign ministers of Great Britain, France, and Germany during meetings this week in Washington. They'll talk about what the terms should be for ending the war and what should happen once the shooting stops. As CNN's Charles Bierbauer reports, the U.S. and its allies are no longer content to merely force the Iraqis out of Kuwait.
President Bush quickly rejected Saddam Hussein's claim that Iraqi forces are withdrawing from Kuwait.
Saddam's most recent speech is an outrage. He is not withdrawing. His defeated forces are retreating. He is trying to claim victory in the midst of a rout, and he is not voluntarily giving up Kuwait.
The president called for Iraqi troops to lay down their arms, all Iraqi troops, those in Kuwait and those such as the Republican Guards which remain in Iraq. There is a reason for this distinction, and it goes beyond the simple pursuit of the war.
He is trying to save the remnants of power and control in the Middle East by every means possible. And here, too, Saddam Hussein will fail.
The issue as seen here is no longer liberating Kuwait from Iraq, but liberating Iraq from Saddam Hussein.
Saddam and his military machine are simply incompatible with a lasting and just peace.
Well, I just told the president we closed the meeting, don't let Saddam Hussein off the hook.
U.S. officials are, however, uncertain who or what might follow. The tacit declaration that Saddam Hussein must go raises concerns with Soviet officials who have sought to barter a peaceful solution.
One can hear even at times statements that the goal is to have Saddam Hussein removed from power, and it would be a very unfortunate precedent for the United Nations to create at least the impression among the population of the world that it can be one of the goals of the United Nations to fight for the removal of a certain individual from power.
U.S. officials shrug off current Soviet and United Nations diplomatic efforts. The goals have altered since the early declaration that Saddam Hussein simply had to withdraw his troops.
It may or may not be considered a changing of the goal, but it is a reality, and that's what's going to happen.
Washington's mood echoes the recent Bush declaration that what we say goes. As for the president's mood, First Lady Barbara Bush described it while visiting Marine families at Quantico, Virginia.
He's a very stable, steady person, and he would like to see it over.
And the president, at a ceremony at the Army's Fort Myer, said it soon should be.
We are not only on schedule, we're ahead of schedule. And no commander-in-chief has ever been so proud of America's men and women in uniform.
A senior administration official here says President Bush hopes to bring some U.S. troops home soon after Iraqi forces are disarmed or dealt with. Charles Bierbauer, CNN, the White House.
A report on the capture of some Iraqi troops in Kuwait. That story when we return.
Hello. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having a dinner party and I've run out of coffee.
What follows is the story of the first day of the ground war for Task Force Ripper, the quick surrender of thousands of Iraqi soldiers.
There's a bunch of them down there that's already been searched. Yeah, I'll show you. One standing? Yeah, I think it's the one standing. They're moving around now, so just go down there and tell them you got the search.
Task Force Ripper, with its battalion of tanks in the lead, covered at least 25 to 30 miles of occupied territory in Kuwait Sunday. Their guard was not lowered for a moment, but resistance was virtually non-existent and limited to defensive barriers established long ago and sporadic artillery fire. It could hardly have gone better for the Marines. Mark Dolmage, CNN, with the 1st Marine Division Task Force Ripper in Kuwait.
Susan Rook and I will continue CNN's Gulf War coverage, and also later this hour, more live reporting from Kuwait City.
Years ago, Home Shopping Club began selling a large variety of products on national television. We offered big savings. And
Charles Jaco reports from Kuwait City approximately 30 minutes ago. He interviewed a Kuwaiti Navy lieutenant who said that he and his fellow soldiers were going to raise the flag, the Kuwaiti flag, saying, "We, the Kuwaitis, have to be the ones to raise our flag in our country." This is Pentagon sources tell CNN about several major developments on the battlefield, developments concerning the Allied forces that have been pushing northward through Iraq. Sources say those forces have now effectively cut off Iraq's Republican Guard. The U.S. Army's 24th Mechanized Infantry Division has captured more than 50 Republican Guard tanks near the Euphrates River, while the Army's 101st Airborne Division, along with French troops, are now halfway between Basra and Baghdad. In addition, Apache helicopters are deep inside Iraq, attacking a Republican Guard division. And the U.S. Army's 7th Corps is currently fighting a prolonged tank battle with Republican Guard units. Pentagon sources say they are now free to release specific battlefield information because it is simply too late for the Iraqis to do anything about it. Allied officials are, quote, very pleased with the progress of the ground war so far. This, its 4th day. Ground forces have rolled through Kuwait and Iraq with little resistance. Allied casualties are lighter than expected, and Iraqi soldiers are continuing to surrender by the tens of thousands.
U.S. intelligence reports indicate President Saddam Hussein still is in the Baghdad area. Pentagon officials refuse to say what will happen if Saddam tries to escape. CNN Special Assignment Correspondent Mark Feldstein reports the United States is carefully weighing what to do about the Iraqi leader.
In Kuwait, tens of thousands of Iraqi soldiers have officially surrendered, but not their leader, Saddam Hussein. For President Bush, the lesson is clear.
The coalition will therefore continue to prosecute the war with undiminished intensity.
Even with Iraqi soldiers in retreat, U.S. military strategists say that it's in America's interest to inflict maximum damage on Saddam Hussein and his military.
There's no point to expending this much blood and treasure and then have the same difficulty pop up again.
So get rid of his army?
Yes, and him too.
Dr. Gerald Post has analyzed the psychology of Saddam Hussein for the CIA.
The only language he has ever understood throughout his 22 years in the seat of power is the language of power, and he is responding now to that clear and unambiguous language. So it's quite appropriate to insist on his not just withdrawing, but laying down his arms and acknowledging fully. Anything left ambiguous, we can be sure he will take that ambiguity and recast it into a victory in as best he can for him in Iraq.
But as the world watches the images of Iraq's retreat and surrender, some Arab leaders say that by continuing to punish Saddam Hussein, the U.S. is miscalculating the reaction of the Arab world.
You should avoid this kind of humiliation, resentment, hate, because it will be great obstacles to any kind of reconciliation in the future.
But former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger says to secure peace, the war must continue, at least for now.
But in bringing the war to a conclusion, we should leave no way in which it can be said that Saddam Hussein achieved something.
How do we do that without humiliating him?
Well, I don't object to humiliating him. I think saving his face mortgages the peace.
In many respects, the debate over what to do about Saddam Hussein comes down to reconciling military goals with diplomatic ones. Militarily, the United States would like to get rid of him altogether, but that desire must be weighed against the long-term diplomatic costs.
A military victory produces only fleeting positive consequences. The enduring positive consequences have to come from a much more deliberate political strategy. And I think the real test is yet to come. We're yet to see whether we have such a political strategy.
In the days ahead, as Iraq's army continues its apparent surrender, the United States must determine how it can translate its stunning military victory into a more elusive peace.
The extent to which we continue at this point to push for the humiliation of Saddam, continue to push the military outcome, and in the aftermath, push for reparations and push for the humiliation and even the possibility of the destruction of Iraq itself, will not only produce pain in Iraq, but will also produce pain throughout the region. That pain will be translated into anti-Western and potentially quite extremist political movements.
Given the turbulent history of the Mideast, waging war may turn out to be far easier than waging peace. Mark Feldstein, CNN, Special Assignment.
If you would like to write the Special Assignment staff, the address is Post Office Box 2727.
When work's much more than 9 to 5, city to city, take off a ride, relax.
Reports from Baghdad. His reports are cleared by Iraqi censors.
Baghdad, late afternoon. A steady rain emphasizes the mood of depression descending on the Iraqi capital. Renewed hopes for a quick, less bloody end of the war disappear in the gloom of the evening. And night brings further emphasis. The air war goes on for the 41st day in the capital's outskirts. Anti-aircraft fire again probing the heavens. The burst of explosions in the distance. Earlier in the day, the mood was jubilant. Saddam Hussein, in a radio address, had confirmed the morning's headlines. Iraqi military forces had been ordered out of Kuwait. The withdrawal was already underway. He promised that by late evening they'd all be back in Iraq. One citizen produced sound effects that were echoed all over the city. And as children cringed, the celebration went on unabated. Everyone seemed to want an end to the war.
The order to draw out, I think it's a relief. It's a relief for me personally. And I think it's a relief to all the Iraqi people, because nobody here wants war. Everybody here wants peace.
It's good if it's finished. We are waiting to be finished this. We don't want the war.
Iraqi officials knew, however, that the key to the war's end would be the Allied attitude, particularly that of the United States. As first a White House spokesman and then President Bush announced that the withdrawal offer was insufficient, it became clear that the war would go on. By evening, the Allied demand that all 12 United Nations resolutions be accepted by Iraq had not been met. Baghdad residents were off the rainy streets, at home listening to their radios, possibly waiting for yet another speech by their president. And the few restaurants open served only a handful of customers, with 500,000 Iraqis at war in Kuwait against the most powerful military force assembled in a generation. There was little to celebrate. Peter Arnett, CNN, Baghdad.
And, of course, we remind you that all of Peter's reports out of Baghdad are subject to Iraqi censors.
The Soviets welcomed Saddam Hussein's withdrawal order and pressured the United States to accept his word. Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev told workers that superpower...
On the other side of the world, it is 6:45 in the morning in Kuwait City. The city is starting to stir. Our man Charles Jaco has not gone to sleep. He is there. Charles?
Well, Bernie, what you're looking at now are the remains of two Soviet-made T-55 tanks. They used to belong to the Iraqi army. According to Kuwaiti resistance fighters here, the Iraqis fled Kuwait City yesterday in what they described as complete confusion, wrecking their tanks or abandoning them on the way as they were attacked by Allied artillery and air forces. There's another smashed-up T-55 immediately behind me. Quite a bit of Iraqi armor trashed essentially all over the city. The resistance fighters tell us thousands, we keep hearing all sorts of figures, anywhere from 3,000 to 40,000 Kuwaitis were grabbed by the Iraqis as they left the city, held as hostages or human shields, if you will. The Kuwaiti people are starting to wake up this morning to realize that the first Kuwaiti troops have rolled into the city. In about 5 minutes or so, we expect them to be raising the national flag downtown at a sort of plaza of national independence where their National Day is celebrated, and I'll have to check the date. Today's the 27th, every February 26th, which is the Kuwaiti National Independence Day. So the first Allied troops have arrived here. We have seen Kuwaiti troops, some U.S. troops driving in on this road we're standing on now, heading downtown. We're led to understand that some elements of the United States Marines may be down at the U.S. Embassy and have retaken it and raised the flag. We haven't been able to get out and check that out. What we can tell you is that the Kuwaiti resistance claims they have taken hundreds of Iraqi prisoners and are holding them at various houses around the city, waiting to turn them over to Allied troops. They say the Iraqis committed all sorts of atrocities, and we'll be hearing stories about those over the next few days. We'd like to show you some videotape that's about 5 hours old of what this city looked like when we rolled into it in the dark of night. It was dark, it was dank, there was a heavy fog, but it was only partially due to the rain. A good deal of that fog was due to the oil fires that are burning in literally hundreds of oil wells, wellheads, refineries, and storage tanks around this country, leaving a thick, oily fog hanging in the air. The moon looked like a dirty thumbprint smeared across a piece of glass. You could barely see it. As we rolled in, we were met by several jubilant members of the Kuwaiti resistance, slapping us on the back, talking about how glad they were to see Americans, in fact, any presence here. But we arrived before any of the Allied forces started coming in. As we said, the Allied forces are now coming in. But until they arrived, law and order in the city was essentially being maintained by the Kuwaiti resistance. Some of the damage that was wrought, well, some of the burned out tanks bear witness to the violence that erupted around here from Allied airstrikes, Allied artillery, the pounding that they took as they retreated. Because we have to point out that all of the armored personnel carriers and tanks from the Iraqi army we saw had their turrets and their treads and their front ends headed north, going away from the onslaught and the Allied advance. We're told by some members of the Kuwaiti resistance that the sides of the roads were packed with marching Iraqi soldiers, and the resistance people claim that when one of these tanks was hit or went out of control, it would literally roll over the Iraqi infantry, crushing some of them under their treads, and the column would proceed out. We're led to understand that some Iraqi bodies are still in the streets near where we are, left from that scene yesterday. They describe it as a total rout, with the Iraqis leaving in confusion. We're led to believe that the Iraqi army here did not have any Republican guards in it, those elite combat troops we've heard so much about. We'll have to check that out over the next few days. The situation is still very fluid. Very few Allied troops have arrived here in town. They're taking up positions. There is literally years of cleanup that is going to go on, years of sorting out what was done to whom and when by the Iraqi forces. But right now, all we can tell you is that slightly before 7 in the morning here, the people of Kuwait seem awfully glad to see the Allied troops arrive here. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Kuwait City.
And Charles, I presume it still is not safe to venture anywhere towards the international airport there at Kuwait City.
We're hearing some roars in the distance right now and the thump of what could be artillery, what could be one of the battleships out in the Gulf letting loose some of their 16-inch shells. We're not sure. We went near the airport as we drove in and heard some small arms fire. The thump we just heard could have been bombs or rockets dropped by jets. There are some Allied warplanes that have been streaking overhead, so apparently, in fact, there go a couple right now. At this distance, this time of morning, it's hard to tell exactly what kind they are. But apparently they've been bombarding Iraqi positions as they leave the city because, of course, the U.S. Central Command, President Bush, and the Pentagon have all said that if these troops are leaving and they're still armed, they're valid targets. The resistance leads us to understand it may not be safe in all parts of the city, not because of any organized Iraqi resistance that's still going on, but because of sporadic sniping, a few lone gunmen, they say is what it amounts to. And the resistance people have told us they're essentially chasing them down, hunting them down, trying to find them.
Charles, earlier I heard you express exhilaration at being there in this city since it's such a vital part of the story that has gone on for months. What's the sense you have, the feeling you have on the part of Kuwaitis at, for the first time in months, being able to raise their national flag in their capital?
Cathartic. These people say that even if they were not personally tortured or their family members were not tortured or their houses were not broken into, and parenthetically, that seems to be very few people we've talked to were not harassed, arrested, had things expropriated by the Iraqis in some way. Even if that didn't happen, they feel as if they've been in jail for 7 months under occupation. One resistance member told me, had the war waited another month, there would have been no Kuwait. The resistance might have collapsed, but the resistance people tell me at some points they were literally hanging on by their fingernails, scrounging for ammunition and guns, keeping up the fight, sometimes disappearing underground and not committing any acts of counterinsurgency for weeks at a time. But I would imagine it's like a spring that's been wound too tightly, and it may all burst loose at once. It's still very, very early in the morning, it's Wednesday morning here, and we'll have to see what develops as the day goes on.
Charles, one last question. As we cut away during the last commercial break, there was a live picture of, I think they were women, atop what appeared to be an overpass, and I saw at least 2 Kuwaiti flags. Are they still there, or have they gone on?
I'll look around. They're still there. John, if you could, John Towers, our cameraman / producer, the women and the men are starting to gather up there, carrying pictures of the Emir of Kuwait, waving Kuwaiti flags, cheering. Of course, pictures of the Emir of Kuwait and those Kuwaiti flags have been frowned on. In fact, they've been illegal under Iraqi occupation because the Iraqis, of course, considered Kuwait to be the 19th province of Iraq and that the Emir was not a legitimate ruler. If the feeling I'm getting, and basically it is just an early morning feeling, but if the feeling I'm getting is anywhere near correct, this is just the beginning of the type of celebration that this city is going to see later today.
Okay, Charles Jaco, we thank you very much. And I note that you said that John Towers is running the camera, which is taking pictures of you and what we've seen here live from Kuwait City. That's an invaluable man here at CNN. He was one of the brains behind our coverage in Beijing during Tiananmen Square. So our salute to all of you there, and please take good care of yourselves. I know we'll be coming back to you. Susan Rook and I will be right back in a moment.
That Michael? Yeah. Starts college next year. How's mine? Well, Mike told me the price of his first choice. I know what you mean. I got this broker at Payne Weber. She put me in the zero coupon to cover college. Mm-hmm.
On CNN.
A senior Pentagon official says U.S. troops attacked and defeated one division of Iraq's Republican Guard and now are fighting another division. The 1st Infantry Division is among the troops in that battle. CNN's Doug James is with those troops. He filed this report before the fight.
This one picture from the battlefield sums up the fate of Iraq's 26th Infantry Division. It simply no longer exists.
Right now, it's just like the Super Bowl. We came in and we kicked some butts. And so far, we take some prisoners. And all I can say is no slack for Iraq.
The 1st Infantry Division alone captured 1,400 enemy POWs, including an Iraqi brigadier general.
I was behind the tanks. The tanks are moving towards them. As the tanks gobbled up more and more land, you started to see white flags sprinkle the horizon.
By the way the Iraqi soldiers were dug in here in simple trenches, it looks as if they were expecting an assault by foot soldiers, something they faced many times in their long war with Iran. The Iraqis clearly were not expecting to face the full force of the Big Red One.
If they had the stomach to fight, it would have been a lot more bloody and difficult.
The 1st Infantry has suffered casualties. One soldier was killed when he stepped on either an enemy mine or an unexploded shell. Several others were wounded as they tried to clear the area of hundreds of live bomblets left over from their own artillery barrages. The Big Red One destroyed about 24 tanks and armored personnel carriers on Monday, but then paused to allow British units to leapfrog ahead of their lines. It allowed time for the soldiers to reflect on their experience so far.
It's a shame that it had to come to this. We really feel bad for this. We feel bad about the whole thing, but like MacArthur said, I mean, there's nobody that fears combat more than a soldier himself. But it's just something that you got to do.
And are they glad they did it?
Yeah. Roger.
Yeah. If we don't do it now, square him away now, he's going to get up and rise again sooner or later. Let's bring him down now.
Come back in later.
Let's go all the way down.
Just how far the 1st Infantry Division goes remains to be seen. But clearly, for the Big Red One, this war is not over yet. Doug James, CNN, with the 1st Infantry Division inside Iraq.
It is now 7 o'clock in the morning in Iraq and Kuwait. Dawn, day 42 of the Persian Gulf War. I'm Susan Rook at CNN Center in Atlanta.
And I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Join me, please, for Golf Talk coming up after this local cable break. 2 military analysts and a former member of the National Security Council will examine the war in the Gulf.